Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be ranking all of the main bosses from the Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree DLC by difficulty. So the thing is, there is a ton of bosses in this expansion alone. A lot of them are reused from the base game. However, all of the Remembrance bosses and or main bosses are very unique and they're incredibly memorable, and some of them are pretty difficult. So we're going to focus on ranking the main mandatory bosses of Shadow of the Erdtree, and we're going to talk about which ones are truly the most difficult. So coming in at the easiest spot on this list is the Golden Hippo. Now, technically, this is not a Remembrance boss, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to include it. However, I'm going to because it is technically a mandatory boss, and there are other Hippo mini-bosses in the game, but this one is special because it has a Phase 2 in which it gets these golden spikes. They made a big deal about this boss in the trailer, so I feel like it's warranted to include this one. However, the Golden Hippo is still pretty easy. By the time you fight this, you may have encountered one of the mini-boss versions, and the Phase 2 will probably catch you by surprise. The Golden Hippo has a couple of annoying moves, and its grab attack is almost an insta-kill in most cases, which can be a little bit frustrating. Phase 2, I actually think is a bit easier than Phase 1, or it's at least not significantly harder. It just looks visually a lot different, and there's a few more things you need to look out for, specifically like some projectile attacks, but for the most part, the Golden Hippo is pretty easy to deal with, and it shouldn't give you too much trouble. I should also mention that your perceived difficulty of these bosses is almost entirely dependent on how much Shadow Tree fragments you're using. And yes, by the way, lads, these are pronounced Shadow Tree fragments. Everybody says Skibbity fragments or Scadow Tree fragments, but basically in Old English, I guess, like SC is pronounced sh, so these are just called Shadow Tree fragments, which when you think about it makes sense because, I mean, it's the Shadow Tree. It's like, why would it be called anything else? Like, I don't know why. I don't know why we thought that, but anyways, these are Shadow Tree fragments, to be clear. But for those who don't know, these items are only in the DLC, and they sort of negate the damage that you take and increase the damage you deal to bosses, so it softens the difficulty up a little bit. Now, before we move on to our next boss, I do want to thank the sponsor of today's video. Today's video is sponsored by Omni Heroes, and fellas, if you don't know what this game is, let me put you on real quick. This game lets you unlock hundreds of characters to create your perfect dream team composition. Each hero is incredibly unique with their design and their story and lore, and you'll need to build a dream team of these to go rescue Valkyries that need your help and defeat demons along the way. Not only are they super fun to collect, but there's a brand new event coming with Season 4 that delivers brand new content with a story, relics, dungeon gameplay, and GVG gameplay, which for the uninitiated means guild versus guild. And fellas, listen, I know, secretly we all deep down just want to be part of a guild. Omni Heroes will give you plenty of hours of satisfying gameplay, a great story and world to sink your teeth into, and not to mention all the new stuff coming with the brand new Glorious Return event. This is the best time to pick it up and start playing, and it's super easy to get into, and not to mention everybody downloading it right now will get tons of free pulls for this brand new event. So go download it and go have fun using the link in the description or the QR code on screen, and thank me later. But anyways, thank you very much to Omni Heroes for sponsoring today's video. Back to your scheduled program. Coming up next on our list is the Divine Beast Dancing Lion. So even though the Golden Hippopotamus is the easiest boss on this list, I would say, as far as, mandatory ones go, the Divine Beast is actually the one that you're supposed to encounter first. You should be finding this one pretty early on in the DLC. It's like just after the first dungeon that every player is most likely going to encounter. Now, technically, there is another boss that you could fight first, but I do think that one's a little bit harder compared to this. And it's a very different kind of fight. But I think the Divine Beast Dancing Lion teaches you two things. Number one, if you don't have enough Shadow Tree fragments, this fight will probably feel a lot harder than it should, even if you have a, very powerful ranked up character from the base game. It's still going to give you some trouble. It's also a very strange boss in how it works. You have Phase 1, and then in Phase 2, it can switch between two different elements, either lightning or ice. And if you're not ready for this switch up, it's definitely going to catch you off guard the first time, and moves that you've learned from Phase 1 now have additional hitboxes in the later phases in lightning and ice, so there's even more to watch out for. But overall, I would say this boss isn't the hardest thing in the world. It's just one of those things that's a bit of a learning curve. Unfortunately, one of the hardest things about this boss is the camera. From Software has always had a little bit janky camera design, especially when it comes to bigger enemies, and they've always struggled with that a little bit. The camera can be a little bit weird sometimes here, and getting caught in the corner is no fun. You can't really see what's going on. That sometimes will just be an instant death. But I very much enjoyed this boss just conceptually. I love the mechanics of it, and I think it's an excellent introductory boss for the DLC. It really sets the tone, and even though it's not one of the harder ones on this list, I still think it's a pretty fair challenge for anybody beginning the DLC. All right, so moving on to our next boss is going to be the Shadow Tree Avatar, and as opposed to the Divine Beast, this is not one that you find very early on. Actually, this is a pretty late game boss in the DLC, all things considered. However, it's a very odd one to come across, and this fight is very unique for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think the design of this enemy is incredibly unique. I love the way it looks, man. It's like this like evil looking sunflower. It's so cool. But the thing is, its moveset is pretty simple. To be honest, like there's only a handful of moves, and they do hit really hard. However, the first thing you're going to notice when entering this fight, as compared to basically every other boss, you deal a lot of damage to this thing, like a suspicious amount of damage. And you're like, okay, why is this fight so easy? Am I like insanely over leveled, or you know, what the hell's going on? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. But you realize that once you kill him, you'll actually deal like a critical blow after reducing his health to 0, and then you won't get the remembrance, and you also won't get souls that tell you that, you know, you've completed a fight. He's going to die temporarily, and then he's going to come back. So you have a phase 2 in which he comes back with a little bit less health, and you got to do the same thing. He gets a little bit new moves, you know, a couple more things added to his toolkit. The fight scales up in complexity a little bit as it drags on, but what you realize is you have to kill this thing not once, not twice, but 3 times in the same fight, which is pretty insane. And, you know, even though that's kind of crazy, it makes this fight incredibly memorable. It's really not very hard, though. I'd say this fight is just more of a marathon because you have to get through all 3 phases. You can't really speed run this one a whole lot. I mean, you can, but, you know, not as quickly as some of the other bosses. You can't just completely shut it down. You still have to take your time to some extent. You have to wait for the phases to change. After the 3rd and final time reducing his health bar, you'll finally deal the last blow, and then you'll be given your remembrance and all of your souls. It's a fun fight, not super hard, just takes maybe a little bit of time to learn, and it's a pretty long one as well. Coming up next, we have Romina Saint of the Bud. This is one of the mandatory bosses that you need to kill in order to get into the endgame section of Shadow of the Erdtree, but luckily she's pretty easy, and she's also, again, the sort of archetype that From Software loves. It's lady with a big creature. This is the, you know, Chaos Witch Quelaag or Scorpioness Najka from Dark Souls 2. It's that kind of archetype, and they play almost the same. Her moves do hit really hard, yes, but they're slow and graceful, but if you do get clipped by them, almost every move she does deals a little bit of Scarlet Rot buildup, so if you're getting hit too much, you're probably just going to die from the Rot buildup, and that's probably like the biggest thing to look out for in this fight. However, her moves are very telegraphed once again. They're pretty easy to dodge, and even if you get procced with Scarlet Rot, you can still do something about it, like there's items for that. She has very pretty looking moves. Like, I just love that the way that this fight looks visually. It's not the most mechanically entertaining fight in a DLC that, because Steam now has mixed reviews because this DLC is too hard and the bosses are too hard, Romina Saint of the Bud is an easy softball they throw you. Even though she's late in the game, I would say she's very low on this list, though. She's pretty damn easy, if we're being honest. But it's a fun fight regardless. I don't have any complaints about it. I think it's designed well. It's just sort of it's not one of the more difficult ones in the DLC whatsoever. Moving on to our next boss here, we have Midra, Mother of Fingers. This is a secret remembrance boss in the game, and you have to do a pretty involved quest line in order to get here. I would imagine that a lot of people just casually playing the DLC, not looking stuff up, will probably never find this fight because it is fairly hidden. However, this boss archetype we've definitely seen a lot before. This reminds me a lot of, you know, Rom, the vacuous spider from Bloodborne, or even Ebrietas from Bloodborne. We've seen a lot of enemies like this, or it's kind of like a Stell even in the base game. I think visually this is one of the most entertaining bosses in the entire game. I love the arena. I love the design of this thing. It's just this giant hand with these big fingers, and most of this fight is magic based, right? There are a couple of physical moves that she'll try to hit you with, like slamming the fingers down or chasing you a little bit, but for the most part, especially in like the latter half of the fight when she gets low health, she's going to be using a lot of big magic attacks. There's this one where she literally summons like a black hole above her, and it's incredibly lethal. I love the way it looks. I just like seeing this move. It's fun. Even if I die to it, it's just cool to see. Probably one of the coolest visual designs again ever, but I don't think she's incredibly hard enough to really justify being high on this list or even at the top. She's fun. I think this is more of just a thematic kind of boss, and it's not meant to be the most mechanically challenging thing ever, but this is a difficulty ranking, and for the most part, I don't think Mother of Fingers is going to give you that much of a hard time. You'll probably beat it in a few tries, and the moveset is fairly easy to learn. Moving on to about the middle section of our list, the mid-range difficulty, we have the Putrescent Knight. Now, to be honest, I'm going to be real, this fight took me a lot longer than I think it should have, because I feel I don't know what it was, maybe the weapon I was using or the design of this boss, I don't know, but I felt like everything I was doing to punish it was just a little bit out of range, and the horse it's on was always just slightly far enough away from me where my moves wouldn't hit, and this led for fights to drag on for so long. I feel like this fight is kind of like Orphan of Kaz, but if he was on a horse, and if that sounds annoying, it's because it is. I would still say he's not quite as difficult as Kaz, but they have like a similar moveset, similar archetype, and a way that you need to approach it as well. I think a lot of people's complaints about Shadow of the Erdtree's bosses is that they just don't stop attacking. They literally don't stop swinging, and I mean, if you're watching the gameplay, if this doesn't quite sum it up, then I don't know what does. For every, I don't know, 15 moves that a boss will do, you can maybe do 1, 2 if you're lucky, if you optimize, but most of the time just 1. You have basically no opportunity to punish. You're just like sitting there like, when is it my turn? Okay, you know, I've dodged your whole string, but literally, when can I even push a button? And I feel like this fight is just maybe a little too aggressive for what it is. It's not the hardest like moveset to dodge, but you just don't really get many windows to do anything, and I think that can be a little bit tedious. And I feel like it's not by any means the most difficult boss, because you can learn the moveset in maybe like 2 or 3 tries, honestly, especially if you get to like the second phase. You can get the moveset down pat, you know, pretty fast, but I would just say the fight's tedious really at the end of the day. All right, ladies and gentlemen, coming up next we have Midra. No, I'm kidding, fellas. I'm kidding. This fight's not mid. It's actually pretty sick. Anyways, Midra, Lord of the Frenzied Flame, is what we got shown in the DLC, and I would say this fight lives up to the expectation, and I very much enjoyed learning this one. It's pretty difficult, so the thing is, this fight's interesting. You actually have to, like, kill him in his weak form to get the fight to start, and then once you do, he rips off his own head and just has, like, this orb of madness spewing from his neck, and this becomes, like, his main attack. Alongside his blade, which also procs madness, this is the most difficult part of the fight to deal with, because if you get madness inflicted, you're either just going to outright die then and there from the status effect, or you're going to get stun locked in place if you happen to survive that, and then he's just going to hit you once or twice and you're already gone. I mean, it's pretty insane, this fight, and you also don't have that much arena to work with. He can do this big meteor slam attack that also inflicts madness, and you don't have a whole lot of room to work with in order to dodge it. So I would say this fight will probably take you a little while to learn, and I would say it's probably one of the most satisfying ones to learn how to play as well. It's very enjoyable. I think this fight is going to stump a lot of people, but it's certainly not impossible or anything. It's not unfair or too oppressive, but it is a fair challenge, and I think it's probably one of the more fun bosses in Shadow of the Erdtree as well. Very much enjoyed this one. Coming up next, I actually wasn't sure where to put this one, but this is going to be Commander Gaius. This is found after accessing the Shadow Keep, and this is essentially the first boss you're going to encounter before really getting into the late game, and I've seen a lot of people say that this fight is worse than Bed of Chaos from Dark Souls 1, which is like, you know, notoriously the worst fight in all of Souls. I just fundamentally disagree with that. I mean, obviously with how big the arena is and the fact that you can use torrent, you know, that's your first instinct is to get on your horse, but you realize that Commander Gaius can actually match your speed there, which is unlike almost anything in, you know, Elden Ring bosses. Torrent is able to outrun just about everything, but Commander Gaius can match your freak, as they say, and so that's just not really a good option. I think this fight is a lot more manageable, and it's just significantly easier to play when you don't use torrent and you just stay on the ground. It becomes, you know, just a normal Elden Ring boss at that point. Still, with that being said, he does have some pretty cool gravity magic moves that he'll use in like kind of phase 2. That can be fairly difficult to deal with because even though he's like a big, like clunkier looking enemy, he still swings like super fast. So it's not a fight that you can scoff at, and this one may take you a little while. I feel like this one's a bit of a wild card. Some people will probably one and done this, and some people will probably get stuck for, you know, months on this fight. There's really no in between. But, you know, as a pro tip, don't use torrent. It's not worth it. All right, so being on the definitely more difficult end of this list, and I don't know if this is a controversial pick or not, but I'm going to put Relena Twin Moon Knight here. So you can either find her first in the DLC or Divine Beast. It's basically between those two. So despite her placement being early in the game, I don't think that makes her an easier fight. This one is still a bit of a skill check for the rest of the DLC. In fact, she plays a lot like Pontiff in Dark Souls 3. The fights are incredibly similar, even down to having double swords swords and their moveset and everything. In phase 2, it's absolutely insane. She has one glintstone sword and one other flaming sword, which not only visually looks insane, but makes her moves stronger and gives her access to different and more complex moves. She even has this attack where she can slam 2 moons into the ground, and if you get caught by the first one, it's basically a true combo, and you are gonna die from the 3rd hit. So I think she's actually very tough, and this is no boss to scoff at, even though she's like either the first or second boss you're gonna encounter in the DLC. I still think she deserves to be on the more difficult end. Coming up next, we have Mesmer the Impaler. So this was the boss that I would say is primarily focused on in the trailers and build up to the DLC. I think we all knew that this was going to be a hard fight, but playing it in reality is something else. Again, I feel like the difficult aspect of this boss is not only the damage output that he certainly has, but the fact that he just does not stop swinging. His combo strings can be incredibly long. The moves are super lethal. They look sick. I mean, look at this skinny dude. You wouldn't expect this kind of damage output from this fella here, but damn, I mean, anybody who's played Mesmer, I think this is also going to be one that people get hard stuck on in the DLC. Now, the thing is, even if you successfully learn phase 1, which might take you long enough because, you know, phase 1 is fairly complex, when you get to phase 2, he starts being able to morph into a snake and basically like summon other snakes in the arena that you also have to contend with and dodge. And at the time that he is a snake, he's usually invulnerable, so you just have to wait for these sequences to be over for you to have even some kind of window to whiff punish. Now, there are certainly windows and opportunities where you can deal damage to him. It's not like the Putrescent Knight where it just feels like there's no opportunities to deal damage. You're going to find ways to hit him here, but the question is, will it be enough before he snuffs you out? Also, he has moves that are definitely meant to punish you trying to back away and heal. Not only the lingering hitboxes from his flame moves, but also just the length of the spear and the way that he can actually, like, you know, just track you down with it. It's very difficult to heal during this fight. You have to do it in very opportune times, and that can be pretty tricky to find, but I would say between phase 1 and phase 2, it's one of the most memorable fights in Elden Ring. I think it's excellent and certainly deserves to be very high on a difficulty list. So coming up next, almost at the top of our list, is the iconic Bale the Dread. And so a little bit of interesting lore about Bale is that if you remember in the base game, there's a dragon lord called Placidusax. This is probably the hardest dragon fight in the base game. And Bale here in the DLC is actually the dragon that ripped off one of Placidusax's head. So, I mean, this thing is nothing to scoff at, and he's a pretty damn difficult fight. He certainly lives up to his name. Technically, you can actually summon an NPC for this one, and he's going to be going crazy on the voice acting. It's actually very funny. But if you play this fight with, you know, no summons or any NPCs, it's super hard. Bale certainly gave me my fair share of ass whooping. Let me just say that up front real quick. But even if you learn phase 1, his phase 2 is something else. Like, not only is it just visually magnificent to watch, I just love the transformation, but he gets super lethal in the second phase. And this is easily the most difficult part of the fight to deal with because he has moves that he'll actually be invulnerable for a pretty long time. He'll be high up in the sky, throwing things at you, coming down with giant meteor effects. Like, you've really got to be on point in this fight, and even if you summon the NPC, it's not a guarantee that you're gonna run away with this one. I mean, if you get grabbed, you're basically dead. If anything big happens, it's over. Like, this fight will end in 1 to 2 moves, essentially no matter what. You cannot afford any mistakes in this fight or else you're going to pay dearly for it. But that being said, I still think it's one of the most satisfying fights to learn. If I had one complaint, it's just that I think that sometimes the camera can be a little wonky again, but that's, you know, a From Software staple. It's a big enemy, and the camera is a little bit awkward for sure. But I mean, that's really the only fault I can give it. Other than that, I had a great time with it, and I think it's maybe the hardest dragon fight in all of Souls now. This probably beats Midra, probably beats Placidusax. I mean, you know, in lore he did, and maybe just even in the game it does too. I mean, you guys can let me know what you think about that, but it's easily one of the most tough dragon fights that we've ever seen. But finally, guys, coming in at the most difficult boss in the entire Shadow of the Erdtree DLC is, of course, the final boss of the expansion, Promised Consort Redon. And this took, you know, me plenty of time to beat. This took Kai Cenat like thousands of deaths. You know, a lot of people are getting stuck on this boss, and you know, I feel many people are regarding this one as now the new most difficult boss in all of Souls, period. Like, I saw some people saying that this beats, like, you know, Sword Saint Ishin from Sekiro. I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, it's pretty close, I would say, but this is a damn hard fight. Again, we fought Redon before in the base game as Star Scourge Redon, but this is a little bit different, and he's on the ground this time. He's a lot more aggressive, and he has very very long attack strings. And I feel like the thing is that phase 1 isn't too difficult. You know, it's pretty easy enough to learn, and maybe it doesn't seem super hard in this way, but I think it's phase 2 is difficult for some fair reasons and some reasons that I don't really love. I can't say it's my favorite boss, but I do think its phase 2 is undeniably really tough. So not to mention, not that you can't summon during this fight, like not that you are not allowed to bring in a mimic or some kind of other spirit ash, but you're very much like encouraged not to, because as soon as you enter the arena, he basically opens up by just meteor charging you every time. So a lot of people just like to walk into a boss summon and just get it done with. You can't really do that in this fight. I mean, if you can summon, you got to find a safe window in order to do so, and even then it's still not guaranteed. Phase 2 and phase 1 are still really tough, and I think this boss certainly lives up to its name. Mikola joins him for phase 2, and that's why all of his attacks have this extra like holy hitbox after everything. And not to mention, just like in his Star Scourge form, he has this meteor attack move that is outright an insta-kill. I mean, if you get hit by it, you're dead. Pretty much no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So this fight, I do believe, is going to stump a lot of people, and you guys can let me know if you feel like Promised Consort Redon is the hardest boss now in all of Souls. I'm not sure if I necessarily would think that, but it's easily the hardest boss in this DLC, flat out. But anyways, this was my ranking of difficulty of all of these Shadow of the Erdtree bosses. Let me know your opinions down below. Make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace out.